Welcome to New Possibilities. I speak truth to power without fear. So earlier today, I was listening to Cynthia G's live stream where she was talking about some statements that Crissie made about brown-skinned women and colorism. And I went back and I listened to Crissie's video as well. And what I want to do is summarize some of the points that they made in their video and just provide my 2 cents, let y'all know what I think about it. So basically, Crissie was saying that, this notion of black people just singing Kumbaya and uniting to fight white supremacy and ignoring this colorism issue is problematic. And basically she was talking about how, people advance this idea that all black people are treated the same by the society, that all black people are oppressed, and that we need to not focus on colorism and we need to unite around fighting white supremacy. And, a point that Cynthia G made was this. She basically said that you can't deal with colorism without dealing with white supremacy. And I think that that's a valid point as well. But let's break this down. So in terms of, the system treating all black people the same, we know that that's not historically accurate. And we know that it's not accurate today. As Crissie pointed out, I mean, if you look at the sentencing of darker-skinned black women compared to the sentencing of lighter-skinned black women, there's a clear and obvious disparity. There's reports citing this disparity, documenting this disparity. And for those of you who aren't familiar with those reports and studies, I will include links in the description box so that you could check those out. We also know that there are differences in employment opportunities for lighter-skinned African Americans compared to darker-skinned African Americans. So the system does not treat all black people the same. And we know this throughout history. We know that they have set up a system of privilege for lighter skinned black people to divide and conquer black people. This is no different from what took place on the continent of Africa, how the colonialists favored certain tribes over other tribes in order to maintain a system of colonialism. And that's essentially what they have done with this colorism piece in America. They have used it to divide and conquer black people by giving lighter-skinned black people certain privileges that even exist today, as I noted. And we all know that lighter-skinned black people were given all kinds of privileges in the early times. We know that every time you do some kind of research on history about the first African American to do this and that, more often than not, they are very fair African American people, barely black. Some of these people are literally passing for white. These first African Americans to do this and that. And we know that like fraternities and sororities, they had the brown paper bag test back in the day. We know that a lot of those elite social groups and all that kind of stuff had colorism and, infused in what they did. They had the brown paper bag test. And, another thing that came up during Cynthia G's live stream, she was talking about how dark-skinned people are more colorist than lighter-skinned people and all this and that, basically trying to blame the victim. And I just think that that's fundamentally wrong and it's fundamentally untrue. I mean, we know that lighter-skinned black people are the ones who taunt and tease darker-skinned black people. And we cannot pretend like this doesn't exist. In most black communities, we've heard the "you're so black" jokes. We've heard those jokes, and we can't pretend like we didn't hear them. And it wasn't the dark-skinned black person telling those jokes. It was lighter-skinned black people, whether we're talking about brown-skinned black people or very fair-skinned black people. But it was the lighter-skinned black people making fun of the darker-skinned black people. And we know this. We know this when it comes, back in the day when it comes to dating, and even today. We know that people had this preference for these lighter-skinned women and stuff like that, and they make it known. They say it all the time. And we see it everywhere. We see it in film. We see it, in these music videos. And that's another manifestation of how the system does not treat all black people the same. We know that black people do not own and control Hollywood. The dominant white society does. And they promote lighter-skinned black people over darker-skinned black people, whether we're talking about music, whether we're talking about acting and other forms of entertainment. And so I think that it is blatantly false that the system treats us both the same, black people of all shades the same. That's just blatantly false. So that's one thing, but that doesn't mean that we should not work together. And that's my point. I think that even though the system is more oppressive towards darker skinned people, black people need to still unite against white supremacy and racism. And I think that it is a valid point that we have to address white supremacy anytime we have a colorism conversation. People need to understand the root of this colorism issue. The root of the colorism issue didn't start with light-skinned black people. That was something that we were taught, something that was passed down, and so we have to deal with that larger piece of the puzzle. But at the same time, we cannot ignore the role that we play in our own community of perpetuating it. Yes, it's true that you do have dark-skinned people who are colorists against their own fellow dark-skinned people. We see it all the time with dark-skinned men, for instance, who have a preference for lighter-skinned black women or white women. We hear, with that guy Gilbert Arenas and his disparaging remarks about Lupita Nyong'o, and then when we look at somebody like a Tommy Sotomayor making all kinds of disparaging remarks about dark-skinned women. So that's just a manifestation of Stockholm syndrome. Like when somebody has been so beaten down by their oppressor, they identify with the values of their oppressor, and that's what you see there. But we have to be clear. I mean, it's not dark-skinned people for the most part who are perpetuating this colorism. It's lighter-skinned black people, and it's the dominant white culture that promotes this thing. But we do, I think that issue of colorism has to be addressed, but we also need to address the white supremacy piece, and that's something that you rarely hear in Crissie's videos. And, I think that's a valid criticism. The only time I heard it was in this video where she's, responding to Cynthia G. And, the whole point of what she was saying about singing Kumbaya, I think that was a valid point, because when we look at colorism, often, it's black people that perpetuate it. It's black people who carry on that legacy of self-hatred. More often than not, it's a black person in a darker skinned person's face telling them about how ugly they are because of their skin, making all kinds of disparaging remarks about dark skin. I mean, we've all witnessed this. Yeah, so that's my thought, man. I just think that, of course, the racism issue is important, and we need to confront that, but we also cannot silence dark-skinned women who are speaking out on this colorism issue. Everybody has to have their own voice, and we can't be the ones to suppress the voices of dark-skinned women speaking out on colorism issues. Just like we don't want a white person suppressing our voice when we speak out on racism, we shouldn't suppress dark-skinned women's voices on the issue of colorism. And just like women don't want black men suppressing their issues dealing with women, we, again, should not suppress the voice of women who want to speak out on this colorism issue. Because by doing so, we are behaving like the oppressor. We are negating legitimate concerns in our community. Now, I don't believe that, people should respond to colorism with, by, making disparaging remarks about lighter skinned people and, and all that kind of stuff. I don't condone that. I think that, all the shades of blackness are beautiful, and we need to acknowledge that, and we need to work together. But at the same time, we can't neglect these very real issues of colorism in our community. So those are my thoughts about this, man. I just wish that, the sisters could work together, on these kinds of issues. And I don't think that, we should suppress this stuff again. I don't think we should discount the voices of dark-skinned women and just tell them to be quiet and fall in line and just deal with this white supremacy thing and ignore the colorism issue, and then like turn the tables on the darker skinned people to make it seem like they are the ones that are the perpetrators. I mean, that's no different from how white people want to demonize black people for speaking out against racism by accusing us of racism when we condemn racism. And it's no different from, you know, like Cynthia G or somebody else, like basically accusing darker skinned women or people of being the chief colorists when they are speaking out against colorism. So anyway, those are my thoughts. Tell me what y'all think. Please rate, comment, and subscribe. Peace.